I never imagined that organizing my own garage would lead to a full-scale war with our homeowners association president. But then again, I never imagined she'd be foolish enough to challenge a licensed home appraiser on the definitions of property use. It was a mistake that would cost her everything, and in the end, restore the peace she had single-handedly destroyed. It all started with a simple desire for order in my own small corner of the world. My name is Mark, and for the last 10 years, I've lived in a quiet, unassuming house in a neighborhood called Maple Creek Estates. It's the kind of place people choose when they want decent schools, a safe street for their kids to ride bikes, and a general sense of peaceful anonymity. I'm a residential appraiser by trade. My work involves driving to different properties, measuring them, taking photos, and then returning to my home office to write up the reports that banks use to justify mortgage loans. It's a job that requires precision, a deep understanding of municipal codes and property law, and a great deal of time spent alone with data. I like it that way. I'm not antisocial, but I do value my peace. My home is my sanctuary, the place where the complexities of property lines and zoning variances fade away. When I first moved to Maple Creek, the HOA was barely a presence. It was a benign entity that existed for two reasons: to collect a modest annual due for mowing the grass at the front entrance, and to maintain the small playground and park area in the center of the development. The meetings were held twice a year in the local library's community room and were usually attended by 5 or 6 people, including the 3 perpetually tired board members. They'd read a budget, confirm the landscaping contract was renewed, and adjourn in under 20 minutes. It was perfect. We were a community of neighbors who operated on a simple, unwritten code. Be respectful, keep your property reasonably tidy, and don't be a nuisance. For 8 wonderful years, that's exactly how it worked. Then Carol and her husband Bill moved in. They bought the 2-story colonial on the corner lot, a house that had a commanding view of the neighborhood entrance. From the beginning, Carol carried herself with an air of managerial authority. We learned through the neighborhood grapevine that she was a department manager at a large retail chain store, a position she felt endowed her with unparalleled expertise in logistics, finance, and human resources. She made it her personal mission to professionalize our sleepy little HOA. She attended her first meeting armed with a binder and a list of suggestions. The tired board members, frankly, seemed relieved to have someone with so much energy take an interest. They voted her onto the board as secretary that very night. It was a coup, though we didn't see it at the time. Within 6 months, the old president, a retired gentleman who just wanted to play golf, had resigned in frustration. Carol, with the support of the other 2 members who were dazzled by her confidence, was voted in as the new HOA president. The change was immediate and jarring. The semi-annual single-page newsletter was replaced by a weekly, 4-page email bulletin written entirely by Carol. It was filled with bold-faced warnings, underlined rule citations, and passive-aggressive reminders about community standards. The rules themselves started to multiply. First, it was the trash cans. They could no longer be left at the curb for more than 12 hours and had to be a specific shade of beige, the color code for which was included in her bulletin. Then came the holiday decorations. A new bylaw was ratified via an email vote that few people even saw, decreeing that Christmas lights could only be displayed for a 14-day period, from December 15th to December 29th. Any deviation would result in a $50 fine. Lawns had to be mowed weekly, and grass height was not to exceed 3 inches, a rule she was known to enforce with a ruler. Most of us just grumbled. It was absurd, it was annoying, but it was easier to buy a new trash can or take down the lights than to pick a fight. We valued our peace more than we resented her petty tyranny. That was the calculation she was counting on. My own confrontation with Carol's burgeoning empire began on a beautiful Saturday in early autumn. For years, my 2-car garage had been a monument to entropy. It was a chaotic jumble of old paint cans, camping gear, half-finished projects, and the tools I'd collected for my woodworking hobby. That weekend, I decided, was the weekend for reclamation. I pulled my car out onto the driveway, opened the big garage door to let in the light and air, and began the monumental task of sorting, purging, and organizing. I had purchased several sets of heavy-duty steel shelving and had a stack of fresh plywood ready to build some custom cabinets for my saws and hand tools. I was completely absorbed in my work, covered in sawdust and sweat, when a shadow fell across the driveway. I looked up from the cabinet frame I was assembling. It was Carol, standing right at the edge of my property line, one hand on her hip and the other holding a clipboard, her official scepter of power. Her eyes scanned the scene before her, the shelves laden with organized bins, the table saw in the center of the floor, the lumber stacked against the wall, my array of clamps and drills. Her expression soured, her lips tightening into a thin, disapproving line. "That's quite an operation you have here, Mark," she said. Her tone wasn't friendly or curious. It was accusatory. I wiped a bead of sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand. "Just getting the garage organized, Carol. It was long overdue." She took a deliberate step onto my driveway, her gaze fixed on my table saw. "This looks like a commercial operation," she stated, not as a question, but as a verdict. "The covenants are very clear. Section 7, paragraph B, states that no business may be run from a residence if it involves non-resident employee or client traffic or the storage of commercial materials and equipment." I felt a flash of annoyance, but kept my voice even. I was used to dealing with difficult people in my line of work. "Carol, this is a hobby. I'm a home appraiser. My business is my laptop and my car. All of this," I said, gesturing to the tools and wood, "is for personal projects. I'm building storage for this very garage." She was completely unmoved by my logic. It was as if I hadn't spoken at all. Her eyes narrowed. "That is a professional-grade table saw. That is commercial-grade shelving. You are running a cabinet-making business out of your garage, in clear violation of the rules." I actually let out a small, incredulous laugh. "A business? Carol, I have no customers. I'm not selling anything. I'm literally building shelves to hold my own stuff. Are you going to fine someone for baking cookies in their kitchen because they own a stand mixer?" The sarcasm was a mistake. Her face hardened. "This is not a laughing matter. This is a violation that impacts the residential character of our community and, frankly, the property values." Coming from a department store manager to a licensed property appraiser, the comment about property values was particularly rich. I decided to try reason one more time. "Carol, I assure you, I am not running a business. I am simply a homeowner improving my property. There is no violation here." She scribbled something on her clipboard. "I am issuing you a verbal warning. You have 48 hours to cease and desist all commercial operations and remove the industrial equipment from the premises. If you fail to comply, a formal violation notice will be issued with a $200 fine." "Remove my tools? From my own garage?" I asked, my voice rising slightly despite my best efforts. "That's completely unreasonable." "The rules are the rules," she said, turning on her heel. 48 hours, Mark." She marched back toward her corner lot fortress, leaving me standing in a cloud of sawdust and disbelief. I looked around my garage, at my half-finished cabinet, my neatly organized tools, my weekend project, and felt a cold knot of anger form in my stomach. The peace I valued so much had just been officially declared a war zone. I did what any rational person would do. I ignored her. It was absurd. I wasn't running a business, and no sane interpretation of the covenants could twist my weekend project into a commercial enterprise. I spent the rest of the weekend finishing my cabinets, enjoying the satisfying work of measuring, cutting, and assembling. I installed them against the back wall, and by Sunday evening, my garage was a model of efficiency and order. Every tool had a home. Every screw was in a labeled bin. It was a masterpiece of personal organization, and I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. On Monday evening, I came home from a day of appraisals to find a crisp, white envelope taped to my front door. It wasn't a friendly note. It was a formal notice of violation from the Maple Creek Estates Homeowners Association. It cited Section 7, Paragraph B, and detailed my supposed infraction: operating an unapproved commercial woodworking business. At the bottom, in bold, was the penalty: fine, $200, due within 15 days. My initial anger gave way to a weary frustration. This was a battle I didn't want, but it was one she was determined to have. I sat down at my desk, the actual hub of my real business, and typed up a polite, formal letter to the HOA board of directors. I reiterated that I was not operating a business, that the tools were for a personal hobby, and that the activity was a one-time project to organize my own garage. I respectfully requested that they review the facts and rescind the baseless fine. I printed it, put it in an envelope, and walked down the street to put it in Carol's mailbox, which was, of course, the HOA's official mailing address. A week went by with no response. The following Saturday, I decided to do some yard work. As I was edging the lawn, I noticed her. She was standing on the sidewalk across the street, partially hidden by a maple tree, blatantly taking pictures of my house with her phone. She wasn't even trying to be subtle. She was focused on the garage door, which was closed. It was pure intimidation. When she saw me looking at her, she didn't flinch. She just lowered her phone, gave me a smug little smile, and walked away. 2 days later, another envelope was taped to my door. This one contained a letter, signed only by Carol as president, stating that my appeal had been denied by the board. It also contained a second violation notice: failure to cease and desist commercial operations. This time, the fine was $400, representing the original $200, plus a new $200 penalty for the new week of non-compliance. The letter ended with a chilling sentence: "Be advised that continued non-compliance will result in escalating fines, and the board will take all necessary legal steps to enforce the covenants, including, but not limited to, placing a lien on your property." The word lien was a declaration of war. In my profession, a lien on a property is a serious red flag. It's a legal claim against an asset used to satisfy a debt. It could complicate any attempt to sell or refinance my home. It was a bureaucratic nuke, and she was threatening to use it over a couple of shelves I built in my garage. This had moved beyond a petty squabble. This was a direct threat to my largest financial asset. The conflict also started to ripple outwards, affecting my neighbors. On our street lived Mrs. Gable, a sweet widow in her 80s whose late husband had been an avid gardener. She maintained his beautiful flower beds and had a small, tasteful bird feeder hanging from a branch of her dogwood tree. One afternoon, I saw her on her porch, looking distressed. I walked over to see what was wrong. She held a violation notice from Carol. Her crime? The bird feeder was cited as an artificial attractant for pests and vermin and had to be removed immediately, or she would face a $100 fine. Mrs. Gable was near tears. "The birds were Henry's favorite," she whispered. "I've had it there for 20 years. A few doors down, Arthur, a sharp and witty retired accountant in his late 70s, got his own notice. He was an early riser and enjoyed reading the morning paper on his front porch with his coffee. Carol fined him $75 for failure to remove delivered materials from public view by 9 a.m. His newspaper had been on his porch at 9:15. Arthur was more indignant than upset. "The woman is a menace," he grumbled to me over the fence. "She's running this place like a miniature police state. But what can you do? Fight her and she'll bury you in fines and lawyer fees." He was right. People were afraid. They saw the multiple violation notices on my door. They heard the rumors of the massive fines I was accumulating. They didn't agree with Carol, but they didn't want to become her next target. They chose the path of least resistance, quietly taking down their wind chimes, hiding their garden gnomes, and scurrying to bring in their trash cans the second the truck pulled away. The neighborhood was losing its character, replaced by a sterile, fear-driven conformity. The threat of the lien was my breaking point. My quiet, live and let live approach had failed. Reason had failed. It was time to get professional help. I did some research and found a lawyer named David Chen who specialized in real estate law and specifically disputes with HOAs. I scheduled a consultation. I sat in David's clean, modern office and laid out the whole story. The garage project, Carol's accusation, the escalating fines, the photo taking, the threats against my neighbors, and the final threat of a lien. I handed him the stack of violations and my unanswered letter. He listened patiently, his expression growing more grim as I spoke. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Well, Mark, the bad news is that you're in a classic HOA nightmare scenario. You have a board president on a power trip, and she's using the association's legal authority as her personal weapon. He flipped through the covenants I had brought. The good news is that she's almost certainly overstepping her bounds. The language about commercial operations is intentionally broad, but her interpretation is extreme. A judge would likely find her actions to be arbitrary and capricious. "So I can fight this and win?" I asked, feeling a surge of hope. "Yes, you can," he said, "but it's a long, expensive, and miserable process. We'd have to sue the HOA. It could take a year or more and cost you tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees. And here's the truly insane part. Your own HOA dues would be used by the board to pay for their lawyer to fight you." He saw my face fall. "There is another way, but it's a strategic retreat for now. To prevent them from placing a lien on your house, I recommend you pay the accumulated fines, but you do so under protest. You send them a check with a letter stating that you are paying only to avoid further legal action, and that you do not accept the validity of the fines and reserve the right to reclaim the funds. This takes the lien off the table and buys us time to think." The thought of writing a check to Carol for over $1,000 for the crime of organizing my garage made my stomach turn. But David's logic was sound. It was a tactical move, not a surrender. I agreed. That evening, I wrote the check and the under protest letter. It felt like paying a ransom. With the immediate threat neutralized, I felt a shift inside me. The frustration and anger began to coalesce into a cold, clear resolve. Carol thought she was fighting a hobbyist woodworker. She was about to find out she was fighting a licensed home appraiser who now had a very personal reason to turn his professional skills inward. My job was to find the truth about properties, to dig through public records, and to understand the complex web of rules and regulations that govern them. I decided it was time to do a full appraisal of the Maple Creek Estates HOA itself. My investigation began where all property investigations begin, with public records. As a homeowner, I had the right to inspect the HOA's books and records. I sent a formal certified letter to the board, invoking the state statute, requesting copies of all financial statements, bank records, signed contracts, and meeting minutes for the past 3 years. Coincidentally, the period covering Carol's rise to power. Her response was telling. Instead of complying fully, she stalled. A week later, I received a thin manila envelope. The meeting minutes were heavily redacted, with huge portions blacked out. The financial statements were high-level summaries, lacking any real detail. The major contracts, like the one for landscaping, were missing entirely. It was a transparent attempt to obstruct, and it was the single most motivating thing she could have done. If she had nothing to hide, she would have buried me in paper. The fact that she was hiding the documents meant there was something in them worth finding. Frustrated with the direct approach, I turned to the tools of my trade. I spent my evenings not in my garage, but in my home office, navigating the online portals of the county clerk, the tax assessor, and the code enforcement department. I was on my home turf now. I started by pulling the master deed for the entire Maple Creek Estates development. I cross-referenced the property plats with the HOA's own internal maps. Everything seemed to be in order until I got to the common areas. There were two: the small landscaped area at the entrance and the 5-acre park in the middle of the neighborhood that contained the playground, a few picnic tables, and a large grassy field. The park was kept green by an extensive sprinkler system. It was one of the HOA's biggest expenses, according to the vague financial summaries Carol had provided. An irrigation system that large needs a significant source of water. In our area, that usually meant tapping into the municipal water supply or drilling a private well. Tapping into the city line would be a matter of public record with the water department, and it would be expensive. On a hunch, I searched the county permit database for any water well permits issued for the park's address. Nothing. I expanded the search to the entire development. Still nothing. That was odd. A well of that size requires geological surveys, permits to drill, and inspections. It's not something you just do on a whim. I then searched the state's database of registered wells. Again, nothing. It was as if the well that watered our park didn't legally exist. My heart started to beat a little faster. This was more than a paperwork error. This was a significant violation. Operating an unpermitted well carries hefty fines from the state's Environmental Protection Department. The well needed a pump, and the pump needed electricity. I switched my focus to the county's electrical permit database. I typed in the park's address. This time, I got a hit. A permit had been issued 2 years ago, shortly after Carol became president, for installation of a 240-volt submersible pump circuit. This was the smoking gun for the well's existence. But as I read the permit details, my eyes widened. The contractor listed was a company I'd never heard of, Precision Electrical Solutions, LLC. The inspection history was also strange. The final inspection was listed as passed, owner certified. That was a red flag. In our county, a homeowner can sometimes certify their own minor electrical work, but a commercial installation like this required a third-party inspection by a licensed county official. Owner certified on a job this big smelled fishy. I did a quick business search for Precision Electrical Solutions, LLC. The company was registered to an address in a neighboring town. The registered agent and sole officer of the LLC was a man named Frank Miller. The name meant nothing to me, but something about the whole setup felt wrong. I decided to dig into Carol herself. A little social media sleuthing was in order. I found her Facebook profile, which was mostly public. It was filled with pictures of her perfectly manicured lawn and posts quoting the HOA rules. I scrolled through her friends list, and there it was, Frank Miller. His profile picture showed him standing next to a beaming Carol at a family barbecue. His relationship status identified him as the brother of Carol's husband, Bill. Frank Miller was her brother-in-law. I felt a jolt of adrenaline, the kind I get when the last piece of a complex appraisal puzzle clicks into place. Carol hadn't just hired a contractor. She had funneled a major HOA project to her own family. This discovery sent me back to the shredded document she had sent me. I found the line item in the budget summary. Park irrigation system upgrade, $125,000. It was a staggering amount of money. An unpermitted well, a dubiously inspected electrical job, a contract steered to a family member. It was all starting to paint a very ugly picture. The final piece I needed was the actual contract and the invoices. She had refused to provide them, but now I knew why. My strategy shifted instantly. This was no longer about my garage, or Mrs. Gable's bird feeder, or Arthur's newspaper. This was about potential fraud, embezzlement, and a massive safety and liability issue for every single homeowner in Maple Creek. The unpermitted well could be drawing down the water table or be contaminated. The uninspected electrical work was a serious fire or electrocution hazard right next to a children's playground. And Carol was at the center of it all. I called my lawyer, David, immediately. "David, you're not going to believe this," I said, and I walked him through my entire discovery, step by step. I could hear him typing furiously on his end. When I finished, there was a long pause. "Mark," he said finally, his voice electric with excitement. "This is it. This is the whole ballgame. This isn't just arbitrary enforcement anymore. This is breach of fiduciary duty, potential conspiracy to defraud, and reckless endangerment. We've moved from a civil squabble to a criminal matter." "So what's our next move?" I asked. "Our next move is to stop playing defense," David said. "We go on the attack. The HOA's annual meeting is coming up, right?" "In 3 weeks," I confirmed. "Perfect," he said. "We're not going to file a lawsuit just yet. We are going to prepare a presentation. We're going to lay out every piece of this in front of the entire community. We are going to expose her in a public forum she controls. It will be her own personal gallows." The plan was set. For the next 3 weeks, I worked with David to assemble an ironclad case. He helped me formalize my findings into a clear, legally sound report. I, in turn, used my appraisal software to create compelling visuals, maps, timelines, and financial charts that would be easy for my neighbors to understand. I got 3 independent, anonymous quotes from reputable local well drilling and electrical companies for a project of that scope. The highest quote came in at just under $50,000. Carol and her brother-in-law had skimmed at least $75,000 off the top. While I prepared the evidence, I enlisted Arthur's help. As a retired accountant and a respected longtime resident, he had the credibility and the temperament to help rally our neighbors. We decided against an angry campaign. We didn't want to seem like we were just disgruntled homeowners with a grudge. Instead, we took a quiet, deliberate approach. We spent our evenings and the weekend before the meeting going door to door. We didn't lead with the accusations of fraud. We started by listening. We'd knock, introduce ourselves, and say, "We're a bit concerned about the direction the HOA is heading, and we wanted to hear your thoughts before the annual meeting." That was all it took. The floodgates opened. People complained about the fines, the oppressive rules, the loss of community spirit. They talked about feeling like they were walking on eggshells in their own homes. Only after they had voiced their own frustrations did we tell them, "We've been doing some research into the HOA's finances and operations, and we've uncovered some very serious issues that we plan to present at the meeting. It's really important that as many homeowners as possible are there to hear it." We didn't give them the details, we just gave them a reason to show up. We framed it not as a rebellion, but as a matter of civic duty to protect their investment and their community. By the time the night of the meeting arrived, the buzz was palpable. The community hall at the library, which usually held a dozen people for these things, had every single one of its 100 chairs filled, with more people standing along the back wall. Carol was at the front of the room, sitting at a long table with the other two board members, a mousy woman named Brenda and a stern-looking man named Gary. She beamed at the large turnout, completely misreading the room. "It's so wonderful to see so many of you taking an active interest in maintaining our community's high standards," she chirped into the microphone. She began the meeting with her president's report. It was a 15-minute monologue of self-congratulation. She boasted about the 95% compliance rate on the new trash can color policy. She celebrated the successful and uniform holiday decoration season. She presented a slide showing a picture of the lush green park field as an example of the board's responsible stewardship of HOA funds. It was a masterful performance of oblivious arrogance. Finally, after the treasurer's report, a series of vague pie charts that matched the summary she had sent me, she arrived at the last item on the agenda: homeowner comments and questions. She looked out at the crowd. "Does anyone have any questions for the board?" A heavy silence filled the room. This was the moment. I stood up. My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady. "I do," I said. Carol's smile faltered for a second when she saw it was me. "Mark," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "if this is about your outstanding fines for your unapproved business, this is not the proper forum. You need to address that in writing to the board." "It's not about my garage, Carol," I said calmly, walking toward the front of the room where a projector and screen were set up for her presentation. "It's about the park. It's about this," I said, clicking the first slide onto the screen. It was a satellite image of our neighborhood, with the park's common area highlighted in red. As many of you know, my name is Mark, and I'm a licensed home appraiser. My job is to analyze property, and for the past month, I have been conducting a thorough appraisal of our most valuable shared asset, the HOA itself. Carol started to interrupt, but Arthur stood up from his seat in the front row. "According to the bylaws, each homeowner is allotted 5 minutes for comment. Please let him speak, Madam President." Several people voiced their agreement, and Carol, sensing a shift in the room's mood, reluctantly sat back down, her arms crossed tightly. For the next 10 minutes, I walked them through it all. I didn't raise my voice. I presented it not as an accusation, but as a factual report. I showed them the slide from the county database with "no permits found" for the well. I showed them the electrical permit with the suspicious owner-certified inspection and the contractor's name. Then I put the next slide up. It was a screenshot of her brother-in-law Frank's Facebook page, with a picture of him and Carol's husband Bill arm in arm. The contractor for this project, Precision Electrical Solutions LLC, is owned and operated by Frank Miller. As it turns out, Mr. Miller is our president's brother-in-law. A wave of murmurs swept through the room. Carol's face went from pink to a deep, blotchy red. "That's a conflict of interest," someone shouted from the back. "It certainly appears to be," I continued, my voice level. "But it gets worse." The next slide showed the HOA's own budget line item, $125,000 for park irrigation upgrade. Beside it, I displayed the 3 quotes I had obtained from other licensed, reputable contractors. The highest was $48,500. This means that at a minimum, our HOA overpaid for this project by more than $75,000. That money didn't go to a stranger, it went to the president's family. This isn't just a conflict of interest, this is embezzlement. The room erupted. People were on their feet, shouting questions and accusations. Carol was frantically banging her gavel on the table. "This is slander. These are outrageous and unsubstantiated lies. This meeting is adjourned." But no one was listening to her. No one moved to leave. Her authority had evaporated in an instant. The other 2 board members, Brenda and Gary, looked like they had seen a ghost. They physically slid their chairs away from her, creating a visible gap at the table. Gary, the stern-looking man, was pale and sweating. At that moment, Arthur stood up again, his voice cutting through the noise. "I believe this is no longer just an HOA matter. As a retired certified public accountant, I would like to make a formal motion." The room quieted to hear him. "I move that the board immediately authorize a full, forensic audit of the association's finances for the last 3 years, to be conducted by an independent, outside firm. Furthermore, I move that the complete findings of Mr. Mark's report, along with the results of the audit, be turned over to the County District Attorney's Office for a criminal investigation." "Second!" yelled a dozen voices at once. Carol stared out at the sea of angry faces, her mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. She was cornered, and she knew it. The vote was called. It was a thunderous, unanimous aye from the floor. The motion passed. It was over. Carol grabbed her purse and her binder and practically ran from the room, pushing past the people standing in the back. She didn't say another word, she just fled. The aftermath was as swift and decisive as her downfall. The very next day, the interim board, consisting of Arthur and 2 other long-time, respected residents, contacted the county code enforcement office. An inspector came out that afternoon. He took one look at the makeshift wiring for the well pump and the unpermitted drill site and slapped a bright red Notice of Unsafe Conditions tag on the control box. The entire park irrigation system was shut down, cited as a public safety hazard. True to our motion, Arthur hand-delivered my entire report and all the supporting documentation to the district attorney's office. Within a week, an investigator from their white-collar crime unit called me. I spent 2 hours walking him through my finding. They subpoenaed the HOA's full bank records from the bank directly, along with the records for Precision Electrical Solutions LLC. The paper trail was exactly as I had suspected. Huge payments from the HOA to Frank Miller's company, followed by large cash withdrawals and cashier's checks made out to Carol's husband, Bill. 3 weeks after that disastrous meeting, Carol and her brother-in-law were formally indicted on charges of felony theft, conspiracy to commit fraud, and embezzlement. Bill, her husband, was also charged as a co-conspirator. The case against them was so overwhelming that their lawyers advised them to take a deal. Carol pleaded guilty to a lesser felony charge. Her sentence included 3 years of probation, a permanent felony record that would make her unemployable in any position of trust, and, most importantly, a court order to pay full restitution to the Maple Creek Estates HOA in the amount of $76,500. The exact amount I had calculated they overpaid. Frank got a similar deal. The fallout for Carol was total. Her name was in the local paper. She was a convicted felon. To pay the restitution and their mounting legal fees, she and Bill were forced to sell their house, the colonial on the corner from which she had surveyed her brief, tyrannical kingdom. The for sale sign went up, and within a month, they were gone. The house was purchased by a young family who seemed delighted to be there. Meanwhile, one of the first official acts of the new interim board was a public resolution. They voted to nullify and rescind every single fine Carol had issued during the last year of her presidency. My debt to the HOA, which had grown on paper to several $1,000s, vanished. The check I had paid under protest was returned to me, along with a formal letter of apology from the board on behalf of the entire community. Mrs. Gable got a personal apology from Arthur, who told her she could have as many bird feeders as she wished. Her joy was a small but deeply meaningful victory. With Carol gone, a sense of liberation swept through the neighborhood. The new board, with Arthur as the official treasurer, went to work. They held open meetings to rewrite the most oppressive and absurd bylaws. The rule about beige trash cans was the first to go, followed by the draconian holiday decoration schedule. The new guiding principle was simple. As long as it doesn't create a genuine nuisance or safety hazard, homeowners should be free to enjoy their property. The HOA returned to its original, intended function: basic maintenance and fiscal responsibility. The dues even went down, since we were no longer funding a slush fund. The whole ordeal changed my relationship with the community. I had never been a particularly public figure, preferring the quiet of my home office and garage. But now, people knew me. They would wave as I drove by, stop me to chat when I was getting the mail. They saw me not just as a neighbor, but as the guy who had stood up to the bully and won. They started asking me for advice, not just about property values, but about dealing with contractors or navigating county permits. I had become, much to my surprise, a reluctant community resource. And I found that I didn't mind it. Several years have passed since that tumultuous time. Maple Creek Estates is thriving. The park is beautiful. The well and electrical system were completely redone, this time with all the proper permits and inspections, and for a fraction of the original cost. We have neighborhood block parties in the summer and a potluck in the park every fall. The sense of community, forged in the fire of our shared struggle, is stronger than it ever was before. Property values, I can professionally attest, have steadily increased. It turns out that a friendly, reasonable community is a far greater asset than enforced uniformity. I did see Carol one more time, about a year after she sold her house. I was in a discount grocery store across town, picking up a few things. I came around the end of an aisle, and there she was, working as a cashier. She wore the store's drab vest, and she looked tired and diminished. The imperious confidence was gone, replaced by a weary resignation. Our eyes met for a fleeting second. I saw a flash of recognition, then shame. She immediately looked down, focusing intently on scanning a can of beans for the customer in front of her. I didn't say anything. I just moved to another checkout lane. There was no triumph in seeing her like that, no satisfaction. There was only a quiet, sad sense of justice. She had built a prison of rules for everyone else, and in the end, had only managed to trap herself. Sometimes, when I think back on it all, the moral of the story seems so clear. It's a lesson about the intoxicating nature of petty power and how easily it can corrupt when left unchecked. It's a reminder that a community is a living thing, built on mutual respect and trust, not a ledger of violations and fines. Tyrants, big and small, thrive on the apathy and fear of the reasonable majority. They count on the fact that most of us would rather endure a little injustice than cause a big fuss. But they also have a fatal flaw. Their arrogance makes them believe they are untouchable, that the rules they wield so eagerly don't apply to them. My battle with Carol started because she saw my passion for my hobby as a threat to her authority. She saw my professional-grade tools and mislabeled them as a commercial enterprise. The irony, which I appreciate more every day, is that my actual profession, the quiet, methodical work of an appraiser, the very thing she never bothered to understand, was the tool that ultimately brought her down. She tried to fight me on my own turf, property rules and regulations, without realizing I knew the landscape better than she ever could. She brought a clipboard to a war of deeds and permits. My life has mostly returned to the peaceful state I prefer. I'm back in my garage most weekends. The door is usually open, letting the sun and breeze in. My tools are all there, neatly arranged in the custom cabinets I built, the very cabinets that started this whole affair. I'm currently working on a new project, a small, intricately designed birdhouse for Mrs. Gable, a replacement for one that had gotten weathered over the years. My neighbors walk by and wave, sometimes stopping to admire my work. There are no suspicious glances, no clipboards, no figures lurking across the street with a camera phone. There is only the pleasant hum of my saw, the scent of fresh-cut pine, and the quiet satisfaction of building something with my own two hands in my own peaceful space. Justice, it turns out, is a home that feels like your own.